Millionaire CEO humiliates his black pregnant ex at his wedding. Her revelation shocked everyone. "I have something to say," Jasmine announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of Manhattan's most exclusive wedding venue. Every head turned toward the pregnant black woman in the emerald dress as she walked down the aisle with the grace of a queen. "Jasmine," Brandon's voice cracked from the altar, his face going ashen. "What are you doing here?" She stopped just feet from where he stood with his bride, close enough to see the panic in his steel-gray eyes. "I'm here because you invited me, remember? You wanted me to sing at your wedding." Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You said it would be fitting." But what she revealed next would destroy everything he thought he knew about the family he'd thrown away. Before we dive into this incredible story of love, betrayal, redemption, and shocking revelations, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is. And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss these powerful stories that will change how you see love, forgiveness, and second chances. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The champagne flute trembled in Jasmine Washington's hand as she stood at the edge of the opulent ballroom, watching the man she once loved exchange vows with another woman. The Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across her dark skin, and she pressed a protective hand to her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her distress. 6 months pregnant and glowing despite her heartbreak, Jasmine looked stunning in her emerald silk dress, the same shade Brandon had once said made her eyes sparkle like precious stones. Tonight, she'd chosen it deliberately, a reminder of what he'd lost. "Girl, you shouldn't be here," whispered her best friend Keisha, appearing at her side with concern etched across her face. "This is straight-up torture, Jazz. Let's go before you do something you'll regret." Keisha had been Jasmine's anchor through the darkest months of her life, holding her hair back during morning sickness, driving her to prenatal appointments, and picking up the pieces when Brandon Mitchell, tech mogul and billionaire CEO, had shattered her world with his cruel abandonment. But Jasmine couldn't move. Not yet. Not when she had something that would change everything. "I can't leave," Keisha, Jasmine murmured, her eyes fixed on the altar where her former fiancé stood. "Not after what he did to me. To us." Her hand moved protectively over her belly again. At the altar, Brandon Mitchell looked devastatingly handsome in his custom Italian tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile radiant as he gazed into his bride's eyes. At 32, he commanded rooms with his presence, his tech empire worth over $2 billion, making him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. The same smile that had once made Jasmine's heart race during their passionate 3-year relationship. The same smile he'd worn when he'd whispered promises of forever against her skin in the darkness of their shared penthouse bed. The same smile that had disappeared the moment she'd told him she was carrying his child. That was before he'd discovered she was pregnant. Before he'd accused her of trying to trap him. Before he'd thrown a check for $500,000 at her and walked away, choosing his company's IPO over their love. "Look at him," Jasmine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Standing there like he's some kind of prince, like he didn't destroy everything we built together." The bride, Courtney Ashford, was everything Jasmine wasn't: willowy, blonde, from old money, and most importantly, not pregnant with Brandon's child. She was the safe choice, the one who wouldn't complicate his carefully orchestrated life. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom filled with New York's elite. "If anyone has a reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The ballroom fell into that peculiar silence that follows such pronouncements, the kind where everyone holds their breath, knowing that in movies, this is when everything changes, but in real life, no one ever actually speaks up. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. This was her moment. The moment she'd been planning for 2 weeks, ever since Brandon had made that phone call that had changed everything. 2 weeks earlier. Jasmine had been in her small Brooklyn apartment, folding tiny baby clothes and trying not to think about how she was going to raise a child alone, when her phone rang. Brandon's name on the caller ID had made her hands shake. "Hello, Jasmine." His voice had been cold, businesslike. Nothing like the warm tones that used to whisper her name in the dark. "Brandon." She'd kept her voice steady, proud of herself for not breaking down. "What do you want?" "I have a proposition for you." "I'm not interested in anything you have to offer." $50,000. The number had hung in the air between them like a challenge. "For what?" she'd asked, though part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. I want you to sing at my wedding. The cruelty of it had taken her breath away. You want me to what? You heard me. One song. Something appropriate for the occasion. Consider it a final performance. You're sick, Brandon. You know that. His laugh had been bitter. I'm practical. You need money for the baby, and I need closure. This way, we both get what we want. And what exactly do you think you're getting out of this sick little fantasy? The satisfaction of knowing that you understand your place in my life. You were a beautiful interlude, Jasmine, but interludes don't last forever. The line had gone quiet for a long moment before Jasmine spoke again, her voice deadly calm. Send me the details. So you'll do it? Oh, I'll be there, Brandon. I'll definitely be there. Back to the present. Now, standing in that ballroom surrounded by Manhattan's most powerful people, Jasmine felt the weight of that conversation and everything that had led to this moment. She stepped forward, her emerald dress flowing around her curves like liquid silk. Every head turned toward her, gasps rippling through the crowd as they recognized the pregnant black woman who had the audacity to interrupt a billionaire's wedding. Brandon's face went from confident to ashen in the span of a heartbeat. His bride, Courtney, looked confused and slightly annoyed, her perfectly manicured hand tightening on her bouquet of white roses. I have something to say, Jasmine announced, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. She walked down the aisle with the grace of a queen, her chin held high despite the whispers that followed in her wake. The wedding photographer, caught off guard, continued snapping pictures, his camera capturing every moment of what would become the most talked-about wedding disaster in New York society. Jasmine, Brandon's voice was barely a whisper, his composure cracking like ice under pressure. What are you doing here? She stopped just feet from the altar, close enough to see the panic in his steel-gray eyes, close enough for everyone to see the obvious swell of her pregnancy beneath the silk dress. I'm here because you invited me, remember? Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You wanted me to sing at your wedding. You said it would be fitting. The memory of that phone call still burned like acid in her throat. Brandon had called her 2 weeks ago, his voice cold and calculating. He'd offered her $50,000 to perform at his wedding, a final humiliation, he'd said, to remind her of her place. She was just the struggling singer he'd once kept as his mistress, after all. But Jasmine had accepted for reasons he couldn't imagine. Well, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I have a song for you. For both of you. She turned to address the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of New York's most powerful people, tech executives, politicians, socialites, all watching this drama unfold with the fascination of people who rarely saw real emotion in their carefully curated lives. But first, I think the bride deserves to know the truth about the man she's marrying. Jasmine, don't, Brandon warned, stepping toward her, his hand reaching out as if to stop her. But his bride caught his arm, her grip firm and her voice ice cold. Let her speak, Courtney said, her blue eyes flashing with something between curiosity and fury. I want to hear what your friend has to say. The word friend dripped with disdain, but Jasmine had faced worse than a privileged white woman's condescension. Friend. Jasmine laughed, the sound echoing through the silent ballroom. Is that what he told you I was? She turned back to Brandon, seeing the fear in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as he realized he was about to lose control of the narrative he'd so carefully constructed. Tell her, Brandon, Jasmine said softly, her voice carrying despite its quiet tone. Tell your bride about our friendship. When he remained silent, Jasmine's hand moved to her belly again, the gesture deliberate and unmistakable. 6 months ago, Brandon and I were planning our own wedding, she began, her voice carrying the weight of heartbreak and betrayal. We'd been together for 3 years. He'd proposed on a beach in Santorini, promised me the world, told me I was the love of his life. The crowd erupted in whispers, but Jasmine continued, her voice never wavering. We lived together in his penthouse. I gave up my apartment, my independence, my career to support his dreams. I was there for every late night, every business crisis, every moment of doubt. I believed in him when no one else did. Brandon's face had gone from pale to red, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. But when I told him I was pregnant with his child, everything changed, Jasmine continued, her eyes never leaving Brandon's face. Suddenly, I wasn't the love of his life anymore. I was a problem to be solved. That's not it. Brandon started, but Jasmine cut him off. He accused me of trying to trap him, she said, her voice rising slightly. Said I was just another gold digger who wanted his money. He threw a check at me, $500,000, and told me to take care of it. His exact words. The gasps from the crowd were audible now, and Jasmine could see phones being discreetly pulled out. Society mavens already composing texts to spread this gossip through their networks. When I refused, Jasmine continued. When I told him I was keeping our baby, he had his lawyers draw up papers to ensure he'd never have any legal obligation to our child. Then he had security escort me out of the building like I was some kind of criminal. Courtney's face had gone white, her bouquet trembling in her hands as she turned to look at Brandon, searching his face for denial that never came. Is this true? Courtney asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Brandon opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Courtney, I can explain. Is it true? She repeated, her voice stronger now, carrying across the silent ballroom. It's complicated, Brandon finally managed. Complicated. Jasmine laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. What's complicated about abandoning your pregnant girlfriend for your IPO? She turned back to the crowd, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. But here's what he doesn't know, she said, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. The baby I'm carrying? It's not just any baby. She paused, letting the tension build, watching as Brandon's eyes widen with sudden fear. It's twins, she announced, her smile genuine for the first time since she'd entered the ballroom. A boy and a girl. The words hit Brandon like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his hand reaching for the altar to steady himself. Twins, he whispered, his voice cracking. Your children, Brandon, Jasmine said, her voice strong and clear. The family you threw away for your precious IPO. The son and daughter who will grow up knowing exactly what kind of man their father is. The ballroom had fallen into complete silence. Even the wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures, his camera hanging forgotten around his neck as he stared at the unfolding drama. Courtney slowly removed her engagement ring, a massive 10-carat diamond that had been featured in Vogue, the stone catching the light as she held it out to Brandon. I can't marry a man who would abandon his own children, she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. I won't. Courtney, please. Brandon reached for her, desperation clear in his voice. Let me explain. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, Courtney interrupted, stepping away from him. You're a coward, Brandon. A selfish, heartless coward. She turned to Jasmine, her expression softening slightly, and for a moment, the two women, so different in background and circumstance, shared a moment of understanding. I'm sorry for what he put you through, Courtney said sincerely. You and your babies deserve so much better than this. With that, she dropped the engagement ring at Brandon's feet, the diamond making a small, sharp sound as it hit the marble floor. Then she walked down the aisle and out of the ballroom, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender. The crowd began to disperse in uncomfortable murmurs, business associates avoiding Brandon's gaze, their disapproval palpable. The society photographers who had come to capture a fairy tale wedding were now documenting its spectacular collapse. Soon, only Jasmine and Brandon remained at the altar, facing each other across a chasm of hurt and regret that seemed impossible to bridge. Why? He asked, his voice broken, all his corporate confidence stripped away. Why did you do this? Jasmine studied his face, seeing past the anger to the pain beneath, the fear, the realization of what he'd lost. Because you needed to understand what you threw away, she said softly. Because our children deserve to know their father made a choice, and it wasn't them. She turned to leave, her mission accomplished, but Brandon caught her arm gently. Jasmine, wait. Please. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. For a moment, she saw not the cold businessman who had abandoned her, but the man she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, scared, human. I was terrified, he admitted, his voice barely audible. When you told me you were pregnant, all I could think about was my father. How he left when I was 5. How my mother struggled to raise me alone. I didn't want to be like him, but I didn't know how to be different. So you became exactly like him, Jasmine said softly. You left. Brandon's hand dropped to his side, and she saw tears in his eyes for the first time since she'd known him. I know, he whispered. And I've regretted it every day since. Regret doesn't change anything, Brandon, Jasmine replied, her voice gentle but firm. It doesn't pay for prenatal appointments or prepare a nursery or hold my hair back when morning sickness hits. Her voice cracked slightly. It doesn't love these babies the way they deserve to be loved. Let me try, he said desperately, his corporate mask completely gone now, replaced by raw human need. Let me be the father I should have been from the beginning. Jasmine shook her head, her heart breaking all over again, not for herself this time, but for the man who had lost everything because he was too afraid to fight for it. It's too late for us, Brandon, she said quietly. But it's not too late for them. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the twins moving restlessly inside her. If you really want to be their father, you'll have to prove it. Not with money or grand gestures, but with consistency, with showing up, with putting them first, even when it's hard. She walked away then, leaving Brandon alone at the altar surrounded by the ruins of his wedding day, scattered rose petals, an abandoned engagement ring, and the echoes of promises that would never be kept. But as she reached the ballroom doors, she heard him call out, his voice carrying across the empty space. What are their names? The babies. What will you name them? Jasmine paused, her hand on the ornate door handle, and for a moment she considered not answering. But these were his children too, regardless of his failures. Hope, she said without turning around, her voice carrying across the empty ballroom. Her name will be Hope, and his will be Justice. The names hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Hope, for the future she was building for her children. Justice, for the reckoning that had finally come. Brandon stood frozen at the altar, those two names echoing in his mind as Jasmine disappeared through the doors, taking with her any chance of the life he thought he wanted. Outside the ballroom, Keisha was waiting with Jasmine's coat and purse, her face a mixture of pride and concern. Girl, you just blew up the wedding of the century, Keisha said, wrapping the coat around Jasmine's shoulders. How do you feel? Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in months. Like I can finally breathe again. As they walked through the hotel lobby, past the shocked faces of wedding guests who were still processing what they'd witnessed, Jasmine felt the twins moving actively in her belly, as if they too sensed that something fundamental had shifted. You know he's going to come after you now, Keisha warned as they stepped into the cool New York evening. Men like Brandon Mitchell don't like being publicly humiliated. Let him come, Jasmine replied, her hand protective over her belly. I'm not the same woman he abandoned 6 months ago. I'm stronger now. I have to be for them. 3 months later, the soft jazz music drifted through the intimate venue as Jasmine finished her set, her voice wrapping around the final notes of At Last, with the kind of raw emotion that left the audience breathless. At 8 months pregnant, she moved with careful grace across the small stage of Blue Note Brooklyn, one hand resting on her prominent belly as she sang. The pregnancy had transformed her voice, adding a depth and richness that hadn't been there before. Each song was infused with the fierce protectiveness and overwhelming love she felt for her unborn children, and her growing audience could feel it. Thank you, she said into the microphone, her smile genuine as applause filled the intimate club. You've been a beautiful audience tonight. Remember, love isn't just about the fairy tale. Sometimes it's about finding the strength to write your own ending. As the applause died down and the stage lights dimmed, Jasmine noticed a familiar figure at a corner table in the shadows. Brandon Mitchell sat alone, an untouched whiskey in front of him, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He'd been showing up to her performances for the past month, never approaching, never speaking, just listening. At first, she'd been angry, feeling like he was intruding on the new life she'd built. But gradually, she'd begun to see something different in his presence. Not the entitled arrogance of before, but a quiet desperation, a man trying to find his way back to something he'd lost. The Brandon Mitchell who sat in that corner booth looked nothing like the confident CEO who had stood at that altar 3 months ago. His expensive suits hung loose on his frame, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and deep regret. After the show, as Jasmine gathered her things backstage, Keisha appeared with her usual protective energy and a concerned expression. He's here again, she said without preamble, her voice tight with worry. Brandon. He asked if he could speak with you. Jasmine sighed, her hand moving instinctively to her belly as one of the babies. Justice, she thought, based on the strength of the kick, shifted restlessly inside her. What did you tell him? She asked, though she already knew Keisha's answer. That it was up to you. But Jazz. Keisha's voice softened, her protective instincts warring with her concern for her best friend. He looks different. Broken, maybe. Like he's been through hell. Good, Jasmine said, but there was no real venom in it. The anger that had sustained her through the early months of pregnancy had gradually given way to something more complex, a mixture of hurt, hope, and cautious curiosity about the man who'd fathered her children. She'd built a good life in these 3 months. The video of the wedding confrontation had gone viral, making her something of a folk hero among women who'd been abandoned by powerful men. Her singing career had taken off as a result, with bookings at venues across the city and a recording contract offer she was seriously considering. But late at night, when the twins were particularly active and sleep eluded her, she sometimes wondered about the man who had given her these children. The man who sat in dark corners of jazz clubs, looking like he'd lost everything that mattered. Send him back, she decided, surprising both herself and Keisha. But stay close, okay? Keisha nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. You sure about this, Jazz? You don't owe him anything. I know, Jasmine replied, settling carefully into the small chair in her makeshift dressing room. But maybe I owe it to them. She gestured to her belly. They deserve to know who their father really is, not the monster I've made him out to be in my head, but the actual man. A few minutes later, Brandon appeared in the doorway of the small dressing room. Up close, the changes in him were even more dramatic. He looked like he'd lost at least 20 pounds, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd lost or the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible burden. Thank you for seeing me, he said quietly, not moving from the doorway, as if afraid that stepping inside might be presumptuous. You can come in, Jasmine said, though she gestured for him to leave the door open. But I'm not sure what you think this conversation is going to accomplish. Brandon stepped inside but remained standing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. You were incredible tonight, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You always were, but tonight. I've never heard you sing like that. Pregnancy changes everything, Jasmine said simply, studying his face for signs of the manipulative businessman she remembered, including how I feel music. Every song is for them now. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a heavy curtain. Brandon looked like he wanted to say 1,000 things, but didn't know where to start. I've been going to therapy, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back for weeks. Twice a week for the past 2 months. Trying to understand why I ran, why I was so afraid of being a father. Jasmine raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. My therapist says I have abandonment issues, he continued with a self-deprecating laugh that held no humor. Apparently, being left by your father at 5 will do that to you. I was so terrified of failing as a father that I convinced myself it was better not to try at all. And now? Jasmine asked quietly, her voice carefully neutral. Now I realize that running away was the biggest failure of all. Brandon's voice cracked slightly, and she could see him struggling to maintain his composure. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. You, us, our family, because I was a coward. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd cried enough tears over Brandon Mitchell. Brandon, she started, but he held up a hand. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he rushed on, his words coming faster now, as if he was afraid she'd stop him. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But these babies, hope and justice, they deserve better than a father who runs away when things get scary. What are you asking me, Brandon? Jasmine's voice was steady, but inside, her heart was racing. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the raw vulnerability there, the desperate hope of a man who had lost everything and was trying to find his way back. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be the man you needed me to be. The father they need me to be. He paused, swallowing hard. Not your boyfriend or your partner. I know I lost that right. But their father. Please. Jasmine studied his face, searching for any sign of the selfish man who'd abandoned her. Instead, she saw genuine remorse, desperate hope, and something that looked like love, not for her, necessarily, but for the children they'd created together. If I give you this chance, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, it's not about us. It's about them. You don't get to waltz back into my life and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I understand, Brandon said immediately. And if you hurt them, if you disappear again when things get difficult, I will make sure they know exactly why their father isn't in their lives." Brandon nodded, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "I won't disappear. I promise." "Promises are easy to make, Brandon," Jasmine replied, her voice gentle but firm. "It's keeping them that's hard." "Then let me show you," he said quietly. "Let me prove that I've changed." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her hands resting on her belly as she felt the babies moving restlessly inside her. Hope was usually the calmer of the two, but tonight both twins seemed agitated, as if they could sense the tension in the room. Finally, she spoke. "I have a doctor's appointment next Tuesday. Ultrasound to check on their development." She paused, watching his face carefully. "If you want to be their father, you can start by being there for that." Brandon's face lit up with hope so pure and desperate that it almost broke her heart. "Really? You'd let me come?" "I'd let you try," Jasmine corrected. "But Brandon, this is your one chance. Don't waste it." "I won't," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, Jasmine, I won't waste it." As he turned to leave, Jasmine called out to him, "Brandon?" He turned back, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Why now? Why are you really here?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I realized that all the money in the world can't buy back the sound of your child's heartbeat. And I've been sitting in that corner for a month, listening to you sing about love and loss and hope, and I finally understood what I threw away." He paused, his eyes glistening. "I threw away my family. And I don't know if I can live with that." After he left, Jasmine sat alone in the small dressing room, her hands on her belly, feeling the twins settling down as if they too had been waiting for this conversation. "What do you think? Babies," she whispered. "Should we give your daddy a chance?" Hope kicked gently, as if in response, while Justice remained still. Even in the womb, they seemed to have different opinions about their father. Keisha appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "How did it go?" "He wants to come to my doctor's appointment on Tuesday," Jasmine said, still processing the conversation. "And you said yes?" "I said maybe." Jasmine looked up at her best friend. "Keisha, what if he's really changed? What if this is real? And what if it's not?" Keisha countered. "What if this is just another manipulation? Rich men like Brandon Mitchell don't change, Jazz. They just get better at hiding who they really are." "Maybe," Jasmine agreed. "But these babies deserve to know their father. And if he's willing to try, then you're willing to risk getting hurt again." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "For them? Yes, I'm willing to risk it." Tuesday morning at the doctor's office. The waiting room at Dr. Sarah Chen's obstetrics practice was filled with couples holding hands, their faces glowing with anticipation. Jasmine sat alone, checking her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. It was 9:55 a.m., and her appointment was at 10 o'clock. Brandon was cutting it close. She tried to tell herself she wasn't disappointed, that she'd expected this. People didn't really change, especially not men like Brandon who'd spent their whole lives putting themselves first. Maybe Keisha was right. Maybe this was all just another game to him. "Jasmine Washington," a nurse called from the doorway. Jasmine started to stand, her hand on her belly for support, when she heard her name called from across the waiting room. "Jasmine!" "I'm here. I'm sorry I'm late." She turned to see Brandon hurrying toward her, slightly out of breath, his hair mussed as if he'd been running. In his hands, he carried a small bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite flowers, she realized with surprise. He remembered. "Traffic was insane, and then I couldn't find parking," he explained, offering her the flowers with hands that trembled slightly. "I was terrified you'd think I wasn't coming." "I did think that," Jasmine admitted, accepting the sunflowers. Their fingers brushed as she took them, and she felt a familiar spark that she quickly pushed aside. "I'm here," Brandon said simply, his eyes intense as they met hers. "I'll always be here from now on." The nurse smiled at them, clearly assuming they were a couple. "Ready to see your babies?" In the ultrasound room, Jasmine lay on the examination table while the technician, a cheerful woman named Maria, prepared the equipment. Brandon stood awkwardly to the side until Jasmine gestured to the chair beside her. "You can sit," she said softly. "They're your children too." As Maria moved the ultrasound wand across Jasmine's belly, the screen filled with the grainy black and white image of two tiny forms. The sound of rapid heartbeats filled the room, strong, healthy, perfect. Brandon stared at the screen in wonder, his eyes filling with tears. There's baby A, Maria said, pointing to the screen with her stylus. And baby B is right there, both looking very healthy and active for 32 weeks. That's them. Brandon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That's really them. Your son and daughter, Maria confirmed with a smile. Would you like some pictures? Yes, Brandon said immediately, his voice breaking. Please. As they watched their children move and stretch on the screen, Jasmine felt Brandon's hand slip into hers. She should have pulled away, should have maintained the boundaries she'd set. But something about seeing their babies together, hearing their heartbeats in stereo, made her hold on tight. They're perfect, Brandon whispered, tears streaming down his face. Absolutely perfect. They are, Jasmine agreed, her own voice unsteady. Maria printed out several ultrasound photos, handing them to Brandon, who stared at them like they were precious artifacts. This is Hope, Jasmine said, pointing to one of the images. She's usually the calmer one. And this is Justice. He's our little fighter. Hope and Justice, Brandon repeated, his voice filled with wonder. They're so beautiful, Jasmine. Thank you for letting me see them. After the appointment, they walked slowly to the parking garage, both reluctant to break the spell of the moment. Thank you, Brandon said as they reached Jasmine's car. For letting me be there. For letting me see them. They're your children, Brandon. You have a right to be part of this. Do I? He asked quietly. After everything I did, everything I said? Jasmine looked at him, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility and genuine remorse. The man who'd thrown money at her and walked away had been replaced by someone who looked at ultrasound pictures with wonder and tears. Maybe, she said carefully, if you keep showing up, if you prove that this isn't just guilt or some midlife crisis. It's not, Brandon said firmly. Jasmine, I know I have no right to ask this, but could we maybe get coffee sometime? Not a date, he added quickly, seeing her expression. Just, I'd like to know how you're doing, how the pregnancy is going. I want to be involved, if you'll let me. Jasmine considered this. Coffee was safe, public, a chance to see if this new version of Brandon was real or just an act. There's a cafe near my apartment, she said finally. Sunrise Corner. Tomorrow at 10, if you're serious about this. I'll be there, Brandon said without hesitation. Thank you, Jasmine, for giving me this chance. As she drove home, Jasmine couldn't shake the image of Brandon's face when he'd seen their babies on the ultrasound screen. The raw emotion, the tears, the way his voice had broken when he'd whispered perfect. It was so different from the cold, calculating man who'd walked away from her 6 months ago. But she'd been hurt before. She couldn't let herself hope too much, too soon. Her phone buzzed with a text message as she pulled into her apartment building's parking garage. It was from Brandon. Thank you for today. Seeing hope and justice. It changed everything. I know I have a long way to go to earn your trust, but I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. Jasmine stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Words were easy. It was actions that mattered. The next morning at Sunrise Corner Cafe. Jasmine arrived at the small Brooklyn cafe 5 minutes early, choosing a table near the window where she could watch for Brandon's arrival. The morning sun streamed through the glass, warming her face as she ordered a decaf latte and settled in to wait, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. At exactly 10 o'clock, she saw him approaching through the glass. He looked nervous, she realized with surprise. Brandon Mitchell, who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, looked genuinely anxious about having coffee with her. He spotted her through the window, and their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed suspended, and she remembered all the mornings they'd shared coffee together in their old penthouse, when the world had felt full of possibility and their love had seemed unbreakable. Brandon entered the cafe and approached her table cautiously, as if afraid that moving too quickly might spook her. Thank you for coming, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. You look tired, Jasmine observed, noting the shadows under his eyes that seemed deeper than they had been the night before. I haven't been sleeping well, he admitted, signaling the waitress. Not since. He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. Since your wedding day? Brandon winced as if the words physically hurt him. Since I realized what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away. He ordered black coffee, his hands slightly unsteady as he folded them on the table. They sat in awkward silence for a moment before Brandon spoke again, his voice tentative. How are you feeling? The pregnancy, I mean. Are you okay? I'm healthy, Jasmine replied carefully, studying his face for signs of the manipulation she'd grown to expect from him. The babies are growing well. Due in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Brandon repeated, his voice filled with wonder and terror. That's so soon. It feels like forever to me, Jasmine said with a small smile, shifting uncomfortably in her chair. I can barely sleep anymore. They're so active at night, especially Justice. I think he's going to be a handful. Do they move a lot? Brandon asked hesitantly, as if afraid he didn't have the right to ask such intimate questions about his own children. Jasmine studied his face, seeing genuine curiosity and longing there. After a moment's hesitation, she reached across the table and took his hand, placing it gently on her belly. Feel for yourself, she said softly. Brandon's breath caught as he felt the firm swell of her pregnancy beneath his palm. For a moment, nothing happened, and then suddenly there was movement, a strong kick that made his eyes widen in amazement. Was that Justice? Jasmine said, watching the wonder spread across his face. He's the active one. Hope is usually quieter, but she's strong too. As if summoned by her name, Hope shifted gently, and Brandon's eyes filled with tears as he felt the subtle movement. They're really in there, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. My children. Your children, Jasmine confirmed, though she didn't pull his hand away. There was something healing about this moment, about sharing this intimate connection with the father of her babies. I've missed so much already, Brandon whispered, his voice thick with regret. The first time you felt them move, finding out they were twins, all those months of pregnancy. You can't change the past, Brandon, Jasmine said gently, finally moving his hand away from her belly. But you can choose what happens next. He looked up at her, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle flame in the wind. What do you want to happen next? Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. The old Brandon would have tried to rush her answer, would have pushed for immediate forgiveness and reconciliation. This Brandon waited patiently, as if he understood that her response would determine everything. I want my children to have a father who loves them unconditionally, she said finally, who shows up for them, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard, when they're sick, when they're struggling, when they make mistakes. I want to be that father, Brandon said earnestly, leaning forward slightly. I know I have to earn it, but I want to try. It's not just about wanting, Brandon. It's about doing. Day after day, year after year. Are you ready for that kind of commitment? Brandon was quiet for a moment, his coffee growing cold as he considered her question. I've been thinking about that a lot in therapy, he said finally. About what kind of father I want to be, what kind of man I want to be. He met her eyes. I know I can't undo the hurt I caused you, but I can promise you this. I will never abandon these children. Whatever happens between us, I will be their father. Jasmine felt something shift inside her chest, a cautious hope beginning to bloom despite her best efforts to protect herself. What about your company? Your career? Those things were more important than family before. I've restructured everything, Brandon said immediately, his voice gaining strength. Promoted my COO to handle day-to-day operations. I'm stepping back from the constant travel, the 18-hour days. I want to be present for my children's lives. And if the company suffers? If you lose money? Brandon's smile was sad but genuine. I've learned that you can't buy back time, Jasmine. You can't purchase love or forgiveness or the sound of your child's first word. I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot what I was supposed to be building it for. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Jasmine had expected. Brandon asked thoughtful questions about her pregnancy, listened without interrupting when she told him about the challenges of preparing for twins alone, and shared stories from his own childhood that helped her understand the fears that had driven him away. My father left on a Tuesday, Brandon said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. I remember because it was trash day, and I was helping my mom take the bins to the curb. When we came back inside, his suitcase was gone, and there was a note on the kitchen table. What did it say? That he wasn't ready to be a father. That he was sorry, but he couldn't handle the responsibility. Brandon's jaw tightened. My mother kept that note for years. I found it when I was cleaning out her things after she died. She'd read it so many times the paper was falling apart. Is that why you ran? Jasmine asked softly. Because you were afraid of becoming him? I told myself I was being practical, Brandon replied. That I was too young, too focused on my career. But the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified that I'd fail them the way my father failed me. So you failed them first, Jasmine observed, not unkindly. Brandon nodded, his eyes glistening. The irony isn't lost on me. I became exactly what I was afraid of becoming. As they prepared to leave, Brandon hesitated, his hand on his wallet. Jasmine, I know this is asking a lot, but would you consider letting me come to your next doctor's appointment? And maybe I could help set up the nursery? Jasmine considered this. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself from further hurt. But looking at Brandon now, seeing the genuine remorse and desperate hope in his eyes, she found herself nodding. The nursery could use some work, she admitted. I've been putting it off because... She trailed off, not wanting to admit how overwhelming it felt to prepare for twins on her own. Because it's a lot to handle alone, Brandon finished gently. You don't have to do this alone anymore, Jasmine. Not if you don't want to. This doesn't mean we're getting back together, Jasmine said firmly. This is about the babies. Nothing more. I understand, Brandon replied. I'm grateful for any chance to be part of their lives. As they walked to their cars, Jasmine felt a strange sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in months. Maybe, just maybe, her children would have the father they deserved after all. But as she drove home, a nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. Brandon Mitchell was a master manipulator, a man who'd built an empire on his ability to convince people to give him what he wanted. What if this was all just another elaborate performance? Only time would tell if the man who'd sat across from her in that cafe was real, or if he was simply the latest version of Brandon Mitchell, carefully crafted to get what he wanted. Her phone buzzed with another text as she pulled into her parking space. Thank you for coffee. For listening. For giving me hope. I won't let you down. B. This time, she didn't delete the message. Instead, she stared at it for a long moment before typing back a single word, prove it. The response came immediately, I will. As Jasmine climbed the stairs to her apartment, she felt the twins moving actively in her belly, as if they too were anticipating the changes ahead. Hope kicked gently against her ribs while Justice performed what felt like somersaults. What do you think, babies? She whispered, unlocking her door. Should we give your daddy a chance to prove himself? The answer, she knew, would come in the days and weeks ahead. Brandon Mitchell had talked a good game, but talk was cheap. It was time to see if he could back up his words with actions. And if he couldn't, well, she'd survived his abandonment once. She could do it again if she had to. But this time, she wouldn't be doing it alone. This time, she'd have hope and justice, and they would be enough. They had to be. What do you think is going to happen next? Can people really change? Or is Jasmine setting herself up for heartbreak again? Drop a comment below and let us know if you believe in second chances. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat. Because trust me, what happens next will surprise you. We're just getting started with this incredible journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single moment of Hope and Justice's story, and the question of whether their father can truly become the man they need him to be. Can a man who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend really change? What happened next will either restore your faith in love or break your heart completely. Over the next few weeks, Brandon proved true to his word in ways that surprised even Jasmine's cynical heart. He attended every doctor's appointment, his face lighting up each time they heard the baby's heartbeats on the monitor. He spent weekends painting the nursery in her small Brooklyn apartment, assembling cribs with the patience of a man who had nowhere else he'd rather be. But it was the small things that began to chip away at Jasmine's carefully constructed walls. The way he remembered she liked extra foam in her decaf lattes. How he researched baby-proofing techniques with the thoroughness he'd once reserved for corporate acquisitions. The gentle way he spoke to her belly when he thought she wasn't listening. Hello, Hope. Hello, Justice, she'd heard him whisper one afternoon as they worked together organizing tiny clothes. It's your daddy. I know I haven't been here, but I'm here now. And I'm going to love you both so much. Jasmine had pretended to be focused on folding onesies, but tears had pricked her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. The Brandon Mitchell who showed up at her apartment every weekend was nothing like the cold businessman who'd abandoned her. This man asked questions instead of assuming he knew best. He listened when she talked about her fears and hopes for their children. He deferred to her decisions about everything from paint colors to pediatricians. You're different, Jasmine observed one Saturday afternoon as they assembled the second crib. At 35 weeks pregnant, she was relegated to supervising from the rocking chair Brandon had insisted on buying. Different how? he asked, not looking up from the instruction manual he was studying with intense concentration. Quieter. More present, I guess. She shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that didn't put pressure on her back. The old Brandon would have hired someone to do this. Brandon paused in his work, a screwdriver in his hand, and looked at her seriously. The old Brandon was an idiot who thought money could solve everything, he said quietly. This Brandon knows that some things can't be bought. Like trust. Like forgiveness. Like the right to be called daddy. And you think you can earn those things by assembling furniture? No, Brandon replied, returning to his work. But I think I can earn them by showing up. Every day. For whatever you and the babies need. As if summoned by the mention of them, both twins began moving actively, making Jasmine gasp and press her hands to her belly. They're really active today, she said, trying to find a comfortable position. Brandon immediately dropped his tools and moved to her side, his hands hovering uncertainly near her belly. Can I? Jasmine nodded, and he placed his hands gently on her stomach. Almost immediately, Justice kicked strongly against his palm, followed by a gentler movement from Hope. They know you're here, Jasmine said softly, watching the wonder spread across Brandon's face. Do you really think so? I know so. They're always more active when you're around. It's like they can sense their father. Brandon's eyes filled with tears, something that had become increasingly common over the past few weeks. The composed CEO who never showed emotion had been replaced by a man who cried openly at ultrasound appointments and got choked up reading parenting books. I love them so much already, he whispered, his hands still resting on her belly. I didn't know it was possible to love someone you've never met. That's what being a parent is, Jasmine replied, her own voice thick with emotion. Loving someone completely before you even know who they are. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in the miracle of feeling their children move beneath Brandon's hands. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the profound connection of creating life together. The moment was interrupted by a sharp pain in Jasmine's lower back that made her gasp and grip the arms of the rocking chair. What's wrong? Brandon was immediately alert, his hands moving to steady her. Just a pain, Jasmine said. But even as she spoke, another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. Oh no. Is it? Are you in labor? Brandon's voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. I think so, Jasmine breathed, gripping his arm as another wave of pain washed over her. But it's too early. They're not due for another 3 weeks. It's okay, Brandon said, though his face had gone pale. Babies come when they're ready. Let me get your hospital bag. It's in the bedroom closet, Jasmine managed between contractions. Top shelf. As Brandon rushed to get the bag they'd packed weeks ago, Jasmine felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She wasn't ready for this. Was anyone ever really ready to become a parent? But ready or not, Hope and Justice had decided it was time to make their entrance into the world. I called Dr. Chun, Brandon said, returning with the bag and his car keys. She's meeting us at the hospital. Can you walk? I think so, Jasmine said, accepting his help to stand. Another contraction hit as they made their way to the door, and she had to stop and breathe through it, her hand gripping Brandon's arm so tightly she was probably leaving marks. You're doing great, he murmured, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. Just breathe through it. The drive to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital was a blur of contractions and traffic lights that seemed to take forever to change. Brandon drove with careful precision, one hand on the wheel and the other holding Jasmine's as she squeezed through each wave of pain. What if something's wrong? Jasmine asked between contractions, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest. What if they're not ready? They're going to be perfect, Brandon said firmly, though she could hear the uncertainty beneath his confident tone. Just like their mother. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Nurses whisked Jasmine into a wheelchair while Brandon handled the paperwork with the efficiency of a man accustomed to managing crises. Within minutes, she was in a delivery room, changed into a hospital gown, and hooked up to monitors that showed 2 strong, steady heartbeats. Both babies look good, Dr. Chen announced after examining Jasmine. Their heart rates are strong, and you're already 6 centimeters dilated. These little ones are definitely ready to meet their parents. 6 centimeters. Jasmine's eyes widened. How is that possible? The contractions just started an hour ago. Sometimes with twins, labor progresses quickly, Dr. Chen explained with a reassuring smile. Your body has been preparing for this longer than you realized. The next few hours passed in a haze of contractions, breathing exercises, and Brandon's steady presence beside her bed. He never left her side, holding her hand through each contraction, whispering words of encouragement when the pain became overwhelming. "You're incredible," he murmured during a brief respite between contractions. "So strong. So beautiful." "I'm scared," Jasmine admitted, her voice small and vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I'm scared too," Brandon replied honestly. "But we're going to do this together. You're not alone anymore, Jasmine. I promise you're not alone." As the contractions intensified, Jasmine found herself gripping Brandon's hand like a lifeline. The man who had once abandoned her was now her anchor, his presence the only thing keeping her grounded as her body prepared to bring their children into the world. "I can see the first head," Dr. Chen announced suddenly. "One more push, Jasmine." With a final surge of effort that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul, Jasmine pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a baby's cry. "It's Hope," Dr. Chen announced, holding up a tiny, perfect baby girl covered in vernix and blood, but absolutely beautiful. "She's perfect." Brandon sobbed openly as the doctor placed their daughter on Jasmine's chest, her tiny fist waving in protest at the bright lights and cold air of the delivery room. "She's so small," he whispered, his finger gently stroking Hope's cheek. "So perfect." "She's beautiful," Jasmine agreed, tears streaming down her face as she looked at their daughter for the first time. Hope had Brandon's strong jaw, but Jasmine's delicate features, and her skin was the perfect blend of both parents. "Here comes baby number 2, Dr. Chen announced, and within minutes, Justice made his entrance into the world, smaller than his sister but equally healthy and vocal about his displeasure with his new surroundings. "And here's Justice," the doctor said, placing their son on Jasmine's chest beside his sister. Both babies are healthy and strong, despite being a few weeks early. As Jasmine held both babies against her chest, Brandon beside her with his arms around all 3 of them, she felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. This was her family, complicated, imperfect, but real and beautiful and hers. "Thank you," Brandon whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for letting me be here. Thank you for showing up," Jasmine replied softly, looking down at their children. "For proving that people can change." Hope and Justice were perfect, tiny but healthy, with 10 fingers and 10 toes each and lungs that worked beautifully, as evidenced by their vigorous cries. Hope weighed 5 pounds, 2 ounces, while Justice was slightly smaller at 4 pounds, 15 ounces. "They'll need to stay in the NICU for a few days," Dr. Chen explained as the nurses prepared to take the babies for their initial examinations. "Just as a precaution, since they're premature. But they're both breathing well on their own, which is excellent." As the medical team worked around them, Jasmine and Brandon sat together in stunned silence, processing the fact that they were now parents. The babies they'd seen on ultrasound screens were real, breathing, crying human beings who depended on them for everything. "I can't believe they're here," Jasmine whispered, watching as the nurses weighed and measured their children. "I can't believe I almost missed this," Brandon replied, his voice heavy with regret. "If you hadn't given me this chance." "But you didn't miss it," Jasmine interrupted gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." Later, after the babies had been settled in the NICU and Jasmine had been moved to a recovery room, Brandon sat beside her bed, holding her hand as she dozed fitfully. The adrenaline of labor and delivery was wearing off, leaving her exhausted but unable to fully sleep. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream," she murmured, her eyes still closed. "It's real," Brandon assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "Hope and Justice are real, and they're perfect, and they're ours." "Ours," Jasmine repeated, the word feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. For so long, she'd thought of the babies as hers alone. But seeing Brandon's face when they were born, feeling his tears on her shoulder as he held them for the first time, she realized that they truly were a family now. "Jasmine," Brandon said quietly, his voice serious. "I need you to know something." She opened her eyes to look at him, noting the intensity in his expression. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything more than what you've already given me," he continued. "But I want you to know that I'm all in. Not just as their father, but, if you'll have me, as your partner. Your family." Jasmine studied his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope and fear warring in his eyes. "Brandon, I know I hurt you," he rushed on. "I know I have years of trust to rebuild. But I love you, Jasmine. I never stopped loving you, even when I was too much of a coward to admit it. And I love our children more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to do this right. All of it. I want to be the father Hope and Justice deserve, and the man you deserve. I want us to be a real family." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her heart racing despite her exhaustion. 6 months ago, these were the words she dreamed of hearing. But so much had happened since then. She'd learned to be strong on her own, to build a life without him. Could she trust him with her heart again? "I need time," she said finally. "This is all happening so fast, and I need to think about what's best for Hope and Justice." "Of course," Brandon said immediately. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise me something," Jasmine said, gripping his hand tighter. "Anything. Promise me that if we do this, if we try to be a family, you won't run when things get hard." "Because they will get hard, Brandon. Babies don't sleep. They cry at all hours. They get sick. They're expensive and exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at the same time." "I promise," Brandon said solemnly. "I will never run again. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together." As if to emphasize his point, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Would you like to visit your babies?" she asked with a smile. "They're settled in the NICU now, and they're both doing beautifully." Brandon helped Jasmine into a wheelchair, and together they made their way to the NICU, where Hope and Justice lay in side-by-side incubators, tiny but perfect, their little chests rising and falling with steady breaths. "They're so small," Brandon whispered, his voice filled with awe. "But strong," the NICU nurse added. "They're both breathing on their own, their heart rates are stable, and they're already showing interest in feeding. I expect they'll be ready to go home in just a few days." As they stood there watching their children sleep, Jasmine felt something shift inside her chest. The walls she'd built around her heart began to crumble, not all at once, but slowly, like ice melting in spring sunshine. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd lost. Maybe love really could conquer all, even betrayal, even abandonment, even the deepest hurt. "What are you thinking?" Brandon asked softly, noticing the change in her expression. "I'm thinking," Jasmine said slowly, "that Hope and Justice are going to need both their parents. And maybe we owe it to them to try." Brandon's face lit up with hope so pure and desperate that it almost broke her heart. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying we take it slow," Jasmine clarified. "We focus on the babies first, and we see what happens. But Brandon, if you hurt them, if you hurt any of us, there won't be another chance." "I understand," Brandon said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I won't. I swear to you, Jasmine, I won't hurt any of you ever again." As they stood there in the soft light of the NICU, watching their children sleep peacefully in their incubators, Jasmine allowed herself to hope for the first time in months. Hope for their family, hope for their future, hope that the man beside her had truly changed. The wedding that had ended in ruins had led them here, to this moment of perfect, imperfect love. And perhaps that had been the point all along. Are you believing in second chances yet? Because what happens next will either make you cry tears of joy or have you questioning everything you thought you knew about love and forgiveness. The real test is just beginning, because anyone can change for a few weeks. But can Brandon prove he's different when the sleepless nights and dirty diapers start? Drop a comment and tell us, do you think Jasmine is making the right choice? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. This is it, the moment of truth. After everything they've been through, will Brandon prove he's truly changed, or will Jasmine's worst fears come true? What happens next will either restore your faith in love or break your heart completely. 6 months later, the soft morning light filtered through the curtains of Jasmine's Brooklyn apartment as she sat in the rocking chair, nursing Hope while Justice slept peacefully in his crib nearby. At 6 months old, the twins had developed distinct personalities that never failed to amaze her. Hope was indeed the calmer of the two, content to observe the world with her father's intelligent gray eyes, while Justice lived up to his name with a fierce determination that reminded Jasmine of herself. He was the first to smile, the first to laugh, and definitely the first to voice his displeasure when things weren't going his way. The sound of a key in the lock made her look up, and Brandon appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee and what smelled like fresh bagels from their favorite bakery. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly, setting the food on the dresser before coming to kiss her forehead. How did they sleep? Justice was up twice, but Hope slept through the night, Jasmine replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Your daughter is definitely the easier baby. My daughter? Brandon raised an eyebrow with a smile. I seem to remember you doing most of the work in creating her. It was a running joke between them, claiming the babies when they were being good and playfully blaming the other when they were fussy. But beneath the humor was a deeper truth. They were truly partners now in every sense of the word. The past 6 months had been a revelation. Brandon hadn't just kept his promises, he'd exceeded them in ways that still surprised Jasmine. When Justice had colic and cried for hours every night, Brandon had walked the floors with him, singing off-key lullabies and never once complaining about the lost sleep. When Hope had developed a mild case of reflux, he'd researched every possible remedy and sat up with her during feedings to keep her upright. He'd restructured his entire life around their family. The man who had once worked 18-hour days now left the office at 5 sharp, delegating responsibilities to his capable team so he could be home for bath time and bedtime stories. He'd moved out of his sterile penthouse and into a warm, family-friendly brownstone just 3 blocks from Jasmine's apartment, close enough to help with middle-of-the-night feedings but far enough to give her space. I have something to tell you, Brandon said, settling into the chair beside her as Hope finished nursing and began to drift back to sleep. Good something or bad something? Jasmine asked, noting the serious tone in his voice. Good something, I hope. Brandon took a deep breath. I got a call from my lawyer yesterday. Courtney's engagement announcement was in the Times this morning. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. That was fast. It's only been 6 months since your wedding. Apparently, she and her new fiancé have been friends since childhood. She said in the interview that sometimes it takes a dramatic wake-up call to realize who you're really meant to be with. How do you feel about that? Brandon was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Grateful, he said finally. If she hadn't walked away that day, I might never have found my way back to you. To us. He gestured around the nursery they'd created together, walls painted in soft yellows and greens, with murals that Jasmine had painted during her nesting phase. It was nothing like the designer nursery he could have afforded, but it was filled with love and laughter and the kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. Speaking of us, Brandon continued, his voice taking on a nervous quality that made Jasmine look at him more closely. There's something else. Before she could ask what, he was sliding off his chair and onto one knee beside her rocking chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Brandon, Jasmine whispered, her heart beginning to race. I know this isn't the most romantic setting, he said, glancing around the nursery with its scattered baby toys and the faint smell of diaper cream in the air. But this is our real life. This is who we are now, parents, partners, a family. He opened the box to reveal not the massive diamond she might have expected, but a simple, elegant ring with 3 stones, a diamond flanked by 2 smaller gems in different colors. The diamond is for us, he explained, his voice thick with emotion. The blue stone is for Justice, and the pink one is for Hope, because any proposal I make now has to include all of us. Jasmine felt tears welling in her eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the man kneeling beside her chair. This wasn't the Brandon who had proposed on a beach in Santorini with a ring that cost more than most people's cars. This was a man who understood that their love story now included 2 other people who would always come first. Jasmine Washington, he continued, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, you are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known. You've given me the greatest gifts of my life, hope and justice, and the chance to be the man I was always meant to be. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you and our children? Jasmine looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then over at Justice, who had woken up and was watching them with curious eyes from his crib. These babies had changed everything, not just her body or her priorities, but her very understanding of what love could be. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Brandon, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Justice chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, as if he approved of the proceedings. Hope stirred in her arms but didn't wake, content to sleep through her parents' engagement. I love you, Brandon said, standing to kiss her gently. All of you. More than I ever thought possible. I love you too, Jasmine replied, and for the first time in over a year, she meant it without reservation. 3 months later at the wedding. The small ceremony took place in Prospect Park on a perfect September afternoon, with just their closest friends and family in attendance. Jasmine had chosen a simple cream-colored dress that accommodated her post-baby body, while Brandon wore a navy suit that made his eyes look even more gray than usual. Hope and Justice, now 9 months old and sitting up on their own, served as the world's youngest wedding party, dressed in matching outfits and sitting in a decorated wagon that Keisha pulled down the aisle. Dearly beloved, the officiant began. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Brandon and Jasmine, not just as husband and wife, but as a family that has already been tested by life's challenges and emerged stronger. As they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, there wasn't a dry eye among their small gathering of guests. Jasmine, Brandon said, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air, 6 months ago, I thought I knew what love was. But watching you become a mother, seeing your strength and grace and the way you love our children, I realize I knew nothing. You've taught me that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. He paused, looking down at Hope and Justice, who were babbling happily in their wagon. I promise to be the husband you deserve and the father our children need. I promise to choose our family every day and every decision for the rest of my life. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together. Jasmine's vows were equally heartfelt. Brandon, when you left, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd have to raise our children alone and that would be enough. But you've shown me that sometimes the best chapters of our lives come after we think the book is finished. She looked at their babies, then back at him. You've proven that people can change, that love can survive even the deepest hurt, and that families can be rebuilt stronger than before. I promise to trust you with my heart again, to be your partner in all things, and to love you through whatever comes next. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was interrupted by Justice throwing his favorite toy, a small stuffed elephant, directly at his father's head, causing everyone to burst into laughter. I think that's his blessing, Jasmine said, picking up the toy as Brandon rubbed his head with mock injury. Either that or he's already establishing himself as the family comedian, Brandon replied, scooping Justice out of the wagon for a hug. The reception was held at a small restaurant in Park Slope, with a menu that accommodated both adult tastes and the needs of 2 babies who were just starting to eat solid foods. It was nothing like the elaborate society wedding Brandon had planned with Courtney, but it was perfect in its simplicity and authenticity. During their first dance, with Hope sleeping in Jasmine's arms and Justice babbling contentedly in Brandon's, they swayed to a jazz version of At Last, the same song Jasmine had been singing the night Brandon first came to hear her perform. No regrets, Brandon asked softly as they moved together. None, Jasmine replied, meaning it completely. This is exactly where we're supposed to be. 1 year later. The sound of toddler laughter filled the backyard of their new home in Park Slope as Hope and Justice, now walking and getting into everything, chased bubbles that Brandon was blowing from the porch. At 18 months old, they were a handful. Justice had inherited his father's determination and his mother's stubbornness, while Hope was proving to be the family diplomat, often stepping between her brother and whatever mischief he was contemplating. Jasmine sat on the porch swing, one hand resting on her growing belly, watching her family with a contentment she'd never imagined possible. At 4 months pregnant with their 3rd child, she was experiencing the kind of pregnancy she dreamed of the first time, one filled with excitement and anticipation rather than fear and abandonment. Mama! Mama! Justice called, running toward her with his arms outstretched, his face covered in the remnants of the snack he'd been eating. Come here, messy boy, Jasmine laughed, pulling him onto her lap for a cuddle. Hope, not to be outdone, abandoned the bubbles and climbed up beside them, her small hand patting Jasmine's belly with the gentle care they'd been teaching her. Baby, Hope said solemnly, one of her favorite words. That's right, sweetheart. There's a baby in Mommy's tummy, Jasmine confirmed, stroking her daughter's soft curls. Brandon joined them on the swing, settling beside Jasmine with a satisfied sigh. Good day, she asked, noting the relaxed expression on his face. The best, he replied, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. The Tokyo deal closed this morning, which means I can work from home for the next 2 weeks while you're dealing with morning sickness. It was typical of the new Brandon, successful in business but never at the expense of his family. His company was more profitable than ever, but he'd learned to delegate and prioritize in ways that kept him present for the moments that mattered. Speaking of which, Jasmine said, I have news about the baby. Brandon's attention sharpened immediately. Good news. The best news, Jasmine smiled. Dr. Chun called with the results of the genetic testing. Everything looks perfect, and she paused for dramatic effect. It's a boy. Another boy. Brandon's face lit up with joy. Justice is going to have a little brother? Justice is going to have a little brother, Jasmine confirmed, laughing as Brandon whooped with excitement, causing both toddlers to giggle and clap their hands. What should we name him? Brandon asked, his hand joining Hope's on Jasmine's belly. I was thinking, Jasmine said slowly, maybe something that represents new beginnings. Fresh starts. Phoenix, Brandon said immediately, the name coming to him as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Rising from the ashes of what we lost to become something even more beautiful. Phoenix Mitchell. Jasmine tested the name, liking the way it sounded. I love it. As they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sun set over their neighborhood while their children played at their feet, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The wedding that had ended in disaster had been the catalyst for everything good in their lives now. Do you ever think about that day? She asked Brandon quietly. Your wedding to Courtney? Sometimes, he admitted, but not with regret. With gratitude. Gratitude. If you hadn't been brave enough to speak up that day, if you hadn't forced me to confront what I'd thrown away, we might never have found our way back to each other. He squeezed her hand. That day was the beginning of our real love story. Even though I humiliated you in front of all those people. Brandon laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. Especially because you humiliated me in front of all those people. I needed to be humiliated. I needed to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't just throw money at your problems and expect them to disappear. And now? Now I know that the best things in life can't be bought, he said, gesturing to their children, their home, their life together. They have to be earned, every single day. As if to prove his point, Justice chose that moment to toddle over and climb into his father's lap, his small arms wrapping around Brandon's neck in a spontaneous hug. Dada, he said clearly, the word still new enough to make Brandon's eyes well up with tears. That's right, buddy. I'm your dada, and I always will be. Hope, not to be outdone, climbed into Jasmine's lap and patted her belly again. Baby Phoenix, she said solemnly, as if she'd been part of the naming conversation all along. That's right, sweetheart. Baby Phoenix. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the Mitchell family sat together on their porch swing, complete and content, and looking forward to the future they were building together. The millionaire CEO who had once humiliated his pregnant ex at his wedding had become a devoted husband and father. The woman who had been abandoned and betrayed had found the strength to forgive and love again. And their children, Hope, Justice, and soon Phoenix, would grow up knowing that love could conquer anything, even the deepest hurt. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most painful endings. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get a second chance to write a better ending. 5 years later, the annual Mitchell Family Foundation Gala was in full swing at the Plaza Hotel, the same venue where Brandon's disastrous first wedding had taken place 5 years earlier. But tonight, the ballroom was filled with a different kind of energy, one of hope, community, and genuine celebration. Jasmine, radiant in a midnight blue gown, stood at the podium addressing the crowd of donors and beneficiaries who had gathered to support their foundation's work with single mothers and abandoned children. 5 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. I stood in a room very much like this one, pregnant and alone, facing the man who had abandoned me and our unborn children. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word of a story that had become legendary in New York social circles. I thought that night was about revenge, about making him pay for the pain he'd caused. But what I learned is that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to destroy someone, but to give them the chance to become who they were always meant to be. She looked out at the audience, finding Brandon's face in the crowd. He was sitting at their family table with Hope, Justice, and Phoenix, all 3 children dressed in their finest clothes and trying their best to sit still. The Mitchell Family Foundation exists because we believe in second chances. We believe that people can change, that families can heal, And that love, real, committed, everyday love, can overcome even the deepest wounds. The applause was thunderous, but Jasmine's attention was focused on her family. Hope, now 6 and every inch her father's daughter in intelligence and determination, was helping 5-year-old Justice color in his program. 3-year-old Phoenix, true to his name, was a bundle of energy barely contained in his tiny tuxedo. Tonight, we've raised over $2 million for programs that support single mothers, provide child care for working families, and create opportunities for children who might otherwise be forgotten, Jasmine continued. But more than that, we've created a community of people who believe that everyone deserves a chance to write a better story. As she concluded her speech and made her way back to the table, Brandon stood to embrace her, his pride evident in every line of his face. "You were incredible up there," he whispered against her ear. "I'm so proud of you." "We did this together," Jasmine replied, settling into her chair as Hope immediately climbed into her lap. "Mommy, you were on the big stage like when you sing," Hope said excitedly, her gray eyes, so much like her father's, sparkling with admiration. "That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes we use our voices to sing, and sometimes we use them to help people." Justice, ever the practical one, looked up from his coloring. "Did we really help people tonight, Daddy?" "We did, buddy," Brandon replied, ruffling his son's dark hair. "The money people gave tonight will help lots of mommies and daddies take better care of their children." Phoenix, who had been remarkably well-behaved for a 3-year-old, chose that moment to announce loudly, "I need to go potty." The entire table burst into laughter, the formal atmosphere dissolving into the beautiful chaos of family life. "I'll take him," Brandon said, standing and scooping Phoenix into his arms. "Come on, little man. Let's go find the bathroom." As they walked away, Jasmine heard Phoenix chattering to his father about the fancy lights and pretty dresses, his voice carrying the wonder that only a child could bring to such moments. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A young woman approached their table hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you." Jasmine looked up to see a woman about her own age, holding the hand of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 4. "I'm Maria Santos," the woman continued. "Your foundation helped me get childcare so I could finish nursing school. I graduated last month, and I start my new job at Brooklyn Methodist next week." "That's wonderful," Jasmine said, standing to shake Maria's hand. "Congratulations. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing, it changes lives. Real lives." Maria's voice was thick with emotion. "My son Diego and I, we have a future now because you believed in second chances." As Maria and Diego walked away, Hope looked up at her mother with curious eyes. "Mommy, why is that lady crying happy tears?" "Because sometimes, sweetheart, when people help each other, it makes us feel so good that we cry," Jasmine explained, her own eyes misting over. "Like when Daddy cries when we hug him." "Exactly like that." Brandon returned with Phoenix just as the evening's program was concluding. The little boy was now wearing his bow tie around his forehead like a headband, having declared it too scratchy for his neck. "How did we do?" Brandon asked, settling back into his chair. $2.3 million, Jasmine replied, still amazed by the generosity they'd witnessed. "And Maria Santos came by to thank us. She's the single mother who got the childcare scholarship. She just graduated nursing school." "That's incredible," Brandon said, his voice filled with the same wonder that had characterized his transformation over the past 5 years. "Do you realize what this means? We're not just giving money away. We're actually changing the trajectory of people's lives." "Just like someone changed ours," Jasmine replied, taking his hand. As they gathered their things to leave, Hope tugging on Jasmine's dress and Justice carefully folding his colored program to take home, Brandon paused to look around the ballroom one more time. "You know," he said quietly, 5 years ago, "I thought this room represented the worst night of my life. And now I think it might represent the best. Because that night, you forced me to face the truth about who I was. And that was the first step toward becoming who I am now." They made their way out of the plaza, their 3 children chattering excitedly about the evening, the fancy food, and the important people they'd met. On the sidewalk, as they waited for their car, Phoenix suddenly broke free from Brandon's hand and ran back toward the hotel entrance. "Phoenix," Jasmine called, but he was already at the doors, pressing his small face against the glass. Brandon caught up to him quickly, kneeling down to his son's level. "What are you looking at, buddy?" The pretty lights, Phoenix said, his breath fogging the glass. They're like stars, but inside. Brandon looked up at the crystal chandeliers visible through the windows, the same ones that had cast shadows across Jasmine's face on that fateful night 5 years ago. They are beautiful, he agreed. But you know what's even more beautiful? What, Daddy? The family we built together. The love we have for each other. That's more beautiful than any fancy lights. Phoenix considered this with the seriousness that only a 3-year-old could bring to philosophical discussions. Can we take our love home with us? We don't have to take it anywhere, little man, Brandon said, lifting Phoenix into his arms. It comes with us wherever we go. As their car pulled up and they settled the children into their car seats, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The foundation they'd built together was thriving, helping hundreds of families across the city. Brandon's company continued to grow, but he'd never again let success come at the expense of his family. And their children were growing up surrounded by love, security, and the knowledge that their parents had fought for their family and won. What are you thinking about? Brandon asked as they drove through the city streets toward home. Everything, Jasmine replied. How far we've come. How different our lives are now. Any regrets? Jasmine looked back at their 3 children, all of whom had fallen asleep in their car seats despite their earlier excitement. Hope's head was tilted against the window, her face peaceful in sleep. Justice clutched his colored program, even in dreams unwilling to let go of his artwork. Phoenix had somehow managed to get his bow tie completely off and was using it as a blanket for his stuffed elephant. None, she said firmly. Not a single one. Not even about that night at the plaza. About humiliating me in front of all those people. Jasmine laughed softly. Especially not about that. That night, I found my voice. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, braver than I knew. And I gave you the wake-up call you needed to become the man you were always capable of being. The man you deserved all along. The man our children deserve, Jasmine corrected. That's what matters most now. As they pulled into their driveway, the porch light welcoming them home, Brandon turned to face his wife fully. Jasmine Mitchell, he said, using her married name with the same reverence he'd once reserved for closing million-dollar deals. You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for believing that people can change. Thank you for giving me the greatest gifts of my life. Thank you for proving that love really can conquer all, Jasmine replied, leaning over to kiss him softly. Even the deepest hurt, even the biggest mistakes. As they carried their sleeping children into the house, Jasmine thought about all the women who might be watching their story unfold, women who had been abandoned, betrayed, or left to raise children alone. She hoped their story would give those women hope, hope that they were stronger than they knew, hope that they deserved better, and hope that sometimes, if you're brave enough to demand it, better actually comes. The millionaire CEO who had once humiliated his pregnant ex at his wedding had become a devoted husband, father, and philanthropist. The woman who had been abandoned and betrayed had found the strength to forgive, to love again, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. And their children, Hope, Justice, and Phoenix, would grow up knowing that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice. A choice their parents made every day, in big moments and small ones, in times of joy and times of struggle. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most painful endings. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get a second chance to write a better ending. The Mitchell family had written theirs, and it was more beautiful than any fairy tale. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, redemption, and the power of second chances. What did you think? Did Brandon prove that people can really change? Or do you think Jasmine was too forgiving? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight for love, to demand better, or to believe in the possibility of change. And don't forget to subscribe to Luxe Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth for more stories that will make you believe in the power of love to transform even the most broken situations. Remember, your story isn't over just because someone else walked away. Sometimes the best chapters are still waiting to be written. Until next time, keep believing in love, keep fighting for what you deserve, and never forget that you are stronger than you know.